Once again, the Labour Party is setting its sights on controlling the boundaries of free speech, this time under the guise of combating Islamophobia. The creation of Angela Rayner's Islamophobia Council is an attempt to define the term in a way that could leave the door wide open for dangerous encroachments on our freedom of expression. This move is nothing short of Orwellian, a calculated step towards silencing criticism under the veil of protecting religious sensibilities. Those who claim to be standing up for Muslims may, in fact, be setting a precedent that will ultimately lead to the erosion of free speech itself. The proposed council, to be headed by Dominic Grieve, seeks to draw up an official definition of Islamophobia. On the surface, this might sound like a noble cause. Who could possibly oppose the fight against genuine hatred and discrimination? However, when we look beyond the superficial and examine the potential consequences of this definition, we find an alarming reality. Critics argue that the definition is so sweeping and ambiguous that it could be used to label any form of legitimate criticism of Islam as Islamophobic. This is not about protecting Muslims from hate, it's about allowing the government to quash dissenting voices under the false pretense of tackling bigotry. What makes this particularly alarming is the very nature of the definition of Islamophobia that Rayner's Council is likely to endorse. The 2018 report, which Labour adopted, claims that Islamophobia is a type of racism targeting expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. By this definition, a comment that criticizes a specific tenet of Islam could easily be deemed Islamophobic, even if the intent is not to target Muslims as people. This is an open invitation for the suppression of free speech in the name of safeguarding religious beliefs. There's a fundamental contradiction in how Labour is choosing to frame the issue. While the party appears eager to protect Islam from criticism, it has repeatedly demonstrated a blatant disregard for the sensitivities of other religious communities, including Christianity. Why is it that mocking Christianity is deemed acceptable, yet questioning Islam must be treated as an offense against society? This double standard undermines the very foundation of free speech, where ideas and beliefs, no matter how controversial, should be allowed to be questioned and debated. Robert Jenrick, the Shadow Justice Secretary, has rightly labeled this council as a Trojan horse for a blasphemy law. This is not hyperbole. The implications of creating an official definition of Islamophobia are far-reaching, extending well beyond the bounds of protecting Muslims from hate. It is an attempt to impose a uniform orthodoxy on public discourse, forcing people to self-censor for fear of being accused of Islamophobia. It doesn't take much imagination to foresee how the government could use this definition to silence journalists, academics, and ordinary citizens who dare to question or critique any aspect of Islam. The very creation of this council signals a troubling trend towards government overreach, where the state assumes the power to define and control the language of social discourse. The potential to criminalize speech based on religious sentiments opens the door to a situation where dissent becomes criminalized, and fear of offending becomes a legitimate excuse for inaction. As Jenrick put it, this is a clear attempt to impose an Orwellian approach to free speech, where only the politically correct opinions are allowed to flourish, and anything deemed offensive is shut down. Moreover, the notion that defining Islamophobia in this way is a constructive step towards a more inclusive society is a farce. If the goal truly were to foster dialogue between Muslim and non-Muslim communities, then encouraging open, honest discussion, not suppressing it, should be the priority. The Labour Party's approach, however, is to create a climate where people are afraid to voice their concerns or ask difficult questions. This not only stifles debate, but also alienates the very people who could benefit from meaningful, respectful conversations about religion, culture, and integration. Labour's commitment to forming a council on antisemitism, as well, reveals another facet of this dangerous game. While it's true that antisemitism is a persistent and real problem, the idea of creating a separate body to address it raises valid concerns. There is a growing feeling within the Jewish community that such councils may be divisive, rather than unifying. Again, the question arises, why is the Labour Party so insistent on defining hate speech in such a way that it limits open discourse? Are they genuinely interested in tackling hate? Or is this part of a broader strategy to control the narrative? The push for these councils and definitions is ultimately about control. It's not about protecting people from hate, it's about ensuring that the government and select ideologues have the power to dictate what can and cannot be said. This is a slippery slope. What begins as a well-intentioned attempt to protect one group from hate quickly turns into a tool for censorship. We should never sacrifice the right to freely express ourselves, no matter how uncomfortable the conversation may be, for the sake of appeasing any particular group or ideology. If we truly care about the future of free speech in this country, we must resist the Labour Party's Orwellian plans. The government has no place in policing our speech, especially when it comes to religious beliefs. Tackling Islamophobia, or any form of discrimination, requires a nuanced, thoughtful approach that doesn't compromise the fundamental rights upon which our society is built. In their current form, these councils represent nothing more than a thinly veiled attempt to suppress free speech. We must reject this creeping authoritarianism before it's too late.